Welcome to Engaging Experts, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with influential attorneys. Our guests will describe their practice and expertise. Then we will go deep on various topics related to effectively using expert witnesses.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Engaging Experts. This is Dan Rubin, the National Business Development Manager of Roundtable Group, and also one of the hosts of this podcast series. We have another stellar guest for you today. John Trimble is a partner with the Indianapolis law firm of Lewis Wagner. His practice focuses on insurance coverage disputes, bad faith defense, lawyer and insurance agent malpractice, business litigation, and catastrophic damages caused by all types of casualty risks, including transportation, construction, product liability, fires, governmental liability, to name just a few. In addition to frequently being hired by outside firms as local counsel in Indiana, John has also earned a reputation as one of Indiana's most sought-after mediators and is the immediate past president of the Association of Attorney Mediators. He has also served on the board of directors of DRI and has been president of the Indiana State Defense Bar, as well as a past Defense Lawyer of the Year honoree. John, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to diving right in. But before we do, here's a brief sponsorship message.
This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
So, John, I'd like to discuss with you the topic of pretrial publicity in high-profile cases and how defense attorneys deal with that publicity. When we're talking about pretrial publicity, can you tell our listeners, what does that mean to you? And can you give us some examples?
Sure. It means a lot of things. And I would say this, it starts with a defense lawyer's knowledge of the implicit biases of the community where the catastrophe has happened. You need to know how they were raised, what their views are. Are they conservative, liberal, moderate? That's just kind of your starting point, because it gives you some idea how they will be impacted by pretrial publicity. The best example I can give you just as a starting point of pretrial publicity is from the morning news that I watched this morning before we began this podcast. During the morning news program, there were at least two advertisements for law firms, and one of them talked about how insurance companies want to defraud you. They want to give you the lowest settlement they can possibly give you. They'll take advantage of you and hire us. Another one was a firm that likes to handle trucking cases, and the advertisement showed truck wrecks and trucks out of control, and certainly was portraying the message that trucks are dangerous and they'll kill you. Hire us. So we have to also understand that after any catastrophe, that the local community has been massaged by advertising of that type that is not only intended to get business for a law firm, but it's intended to color how the community views tort cases. Now, from there, pretrial publicity is your local news. And of course, every morning when you turn on the local news, something bad has happened, whether it's a police action shooting, a crash of some kind. And so if you're dealing with a catastrophe, then the local news reporting, it can be very intense and it can be very persistent. I'll give you an example. In 2011, we had the stage roof collapse at the Indiana State Fair that killed 7 people and injured 70. And the daily news coverage of that event went on for 6 months. And even after 6 months, it continued with various anniversaries and human interest stories about how victims recovered. So local news is big. National news influences. It used to be that people in a community were only influenced by the local news, and that was their view of the world. But now with cable news, more times than not, people's views of litigation and the judicial system are influenced by cable news networks that either support the judiciary or attack the judiciary and talk about big verdicts. So you have to be aware, what national news is coming into your community. And then you also have to think about what's on social media, because every television station has a place for people to go online and comment about stories. Every newspaper has a place to go online and comment about stories. People comment and post on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all the social media outlets, and people are influenced by what they see there. So there's a big hodgepodge of information that comes out after a catastrophe that colors and flavors the views of the local community. And there's not, it's just a fact of life if you're a defense lawyer.
Right. It just seems impossible to be a human being today and just be isolated from any of it. Like you'd have to basically put someone in a bubble. It's a major issue, obviously. How do you deal with it?
Well, to your comment, what's really interesting, and I tell this to my clients after something has happened, when you're in the moment and you're in the crucible of that local news or national news coverage, it seems like the whole world is collapsing around you and you don't know what to do about it. The reality is I'll find out that I'm defending something that I view as high profile and newsworthy, and I'll be talking to somebody and they've either forgotten about it or don't know about it. So one of the realities of news is that the news cycles move so quickly that people move on from one story to the next and forget about ones that happened just a month ago.
Right.
But to answer your question, after a catastrophe, when a lawyer is hired after a catastrophe, I feel like lawyers who handle any kind of catastrophe need to have a toolbox of ways to address pretrial publicity. And it's something that you want to have assembled and that you want to know how to bring out and use when something happens. If you're assembling it as it happens, you're a little bit behind the game. So you want to have that toolbox together in advance.
So can you describe some of those tools you're talking about?
Sure. So the first one that I would mention is public relations consultants, PR consultants. Anybody who is representing a party in a major catastrophe needs to have a PR consultant, and so they perform a whole array of functions that can be very essential at the beginning of the catastrophe as well as later on, and I'll describe how we would use them later on. But at the very beginning, you need a PR consultant who can monitor social media and news and see what's being said, see whether it's truthful, whether it's accurate, or whether it's totally off base, and offer advice as to whether your client should respond. Clients want to respond, and quite often they respond incorrectly, or they respond with no comment, and they can actually make the situation worse by how they approach it. So the PR consultant is available to help you and the client craft a strategy for how to respond. And that means drafting public statements, drafting social media postings, prepping the client representative for interviews, prepping the lawyer if the lawyer is going to be interviewed for interviews, and creating an overall PR strategy that's going to help to help at least shave the sharp edges off of the public sentiment. Mm-hmm. They will also help you understand just what the public's thinking. I'll give you, again, I'll use the state fair as an example. After the state fair stage collapse, there was great horror and dismay on everybody as for what had happened. But what we learned from our PR consultant was that the state fair was a beloved institution. Hardly anybody, in the community hadn't gone to the state fair at some point in time with fond memories of the state fair. everybody wanted the state fair to survive this event and to go on and to reopen. And so what we learned was there was actually a reservoir of public support and warm sentiments for the state fair that was underlying what was being said at the moment. They really can help you. Okay, if that's the public sentiment, then our public statements and our interviews had to be based on our knowledge that people loved the state fair and would be forgiving, which they were. And so without a PR consultant, then you're just simply left to guess about those kinds of things.
Right.
So that's critical.
So aside from PR consultants, are there other tools in your toolbox that you use?
Sure. Let me start with what I call injunctive relief, and that is there is a model professional rule of conduct 3.6, which prohibits lawyers from making statements in the public domain that could influence pending litigation. And so one of the other tools in the toolbox is to be prepared, if you have to ask the court to enjoin lawyers or their representatives from speaking out, particularly inaccurately, about what's being said concerning the event that happened. Okay, that's kind of the second tool. And I should also mention, when you talk about pretrial publicity, I left this out. Plaintiffs' lawyers also hire PR consultants. And so during the state fair case, we were seeing media placements that were either coming from the plaintiff's bar or from other defendants that were seeking to shape the public discourse about, the state fair. So it's not just the defendants who use PR consultants; the plaintiff's lawyers use PR consultants as well. But injunctive relief is the next thing that really comes to mind, is to go before a judge and ask a judge to stop what's happening, or to at least regulate it. The next thing is getting the case into the right court. If you have the opportunity in the state where you're situated, you may be entitled to a change of venue from the county or city where the catastrophe occurred, if you can prove that pretrial publicity is such that your client can't get a fair trial. And that's where a PR consultant also comes into play, because you use the PR consultant to help you accumulate as evidence to present to the court that there's a basis for a change of venue from that jurisdiction, and you show the court examples of what's being said and how pervasive it is. Try to convince the court that the case should be moved somewhere else. It happens all the time in criminal cases. We don't see it very often in civil cases, and it's a long shot, but it's a possibility. The other thing is, if you are representing a client who is from another state, then you may have a basis to remove the case to federal court. And federal judges typically are much more tight-fisted about allowing pretrial publicity, and so you could be better off in a federal court. Plus, the federal courts tend to draw their jurors from a much broader geographical area, so that you're not necessarily getting jurors that are right there from the community where the accident happened. The last point on getting into the right court is really also delaying trial. You typically want to get cases over as quickly as possible, but sometimes if pretrial publicity right after the accident has been terrible, you may want to try to bump that trial out a year, so that there'll be a time for the public their memories to soften and fade, so that pretrial publicity is not as big an issue.
Interesting. John, you were talking about PR consultants, but I wasn't even thinking about the procedural tactics that obviously are so important in the toolbox. I'm curious, though, we at Roundtable Group, of course, are in the business of referring experts. We have PR consultants, we have medical experts, other industry experts, damages experts, really every type of expert from A to Z in our network. But I'm curious about another type of expert in our network, jury consultants. How do you use jury consultants in these cases?
Sure, and that's the next item in my toolbox, jury consultants. I use them a lot of different ways, and I try to get them involved early. One of the mistakes that lawyers sometimes make is waiting until too close to trial to get a jury consultant involved. If you're worried about pretrial publicity after a catastrophe, you want to get them involved almost as early as your PR consultant. What they will do, among other things, is they will do public surveys. A lot of the good jury consultants have programs where they can take a list of 8 or 10 questions that they develop with help of counsel to kind of get a theme, and then simply go out to the public and ask questions and get the public's answer to the questions, in the form of a survey that can give you some pretty good ideas about public sentiment about what's going on. It can be specifically related to the incident, or it can be a little more general, but yet tied to the incident, and such that you get a sense of how the community feels about what's happened. From there, then we talk about focus groups, and typically we use focus groups when we're getting closer to trial. We're in litigation, and we've started developing information about what happened. We've taken some depositions. We may have even videotaped witnesses so we can see what kind of appearance they make and how credible they are. And you bring in a group of people from the community, and either with or without the lawyers, the consultant can talk to these focus groups, show them videos, talk to them about the case, and get their reaction to whatever issues you're interested in hearing about. Of course, beyond that, of course, is mock jury trials, and mock jury trials are all over the board. They can be very abbreviated, they can be longer, but in the right case, we will have a mock jury trial, and we typically will try to bring in a group of people, enough people to hear the mock jury trial, that we then divide them into separate groups for deliberation to see how different groups, will deliberate and assess the evidence they've heard. I think mock juries are very helpful. I'm not convinced they're helpful on what the value of the case is, although they may be, but they're certainly helpful as to how jurors perceive themes, how they view your defenses, how they like your witnesses. And it's really important when I talk about getting a jury consultant involved early. If you defend the case and you don't videotape any witnesses and all you have is transcripts, then the mock jurors don't really get to see the witnesses. And so I advocate that you need to videotape all your depositions so that if you do a mock jury, you can show actual video to those jurors so they can be assessing the credibility of the witnesses. And I'm going on here, but 2 other points. We use jury consultants to assist us with juror selection. Mm-hmm. They can be right there in the courtroom. And we use them a lot to help us develop our themes, how we tell the story, how we characterize our defenses. So, they are a very important part of the toolbox, no question. And they work arm in arm with the PR consultant, who is sharing information with them about what the PR consultant has seen and heard and feels about social media and news, the impact of news on the case.
It's truly eye-opening to me how the sheer amount of preparation that goes into preparing for one of these cases. Do you have a sense, John, for how successful these various tools and techniques can be?
I'll give you an example, and I can't identify it too much because the statute of limitation hasn't run on all the claims in the case yet.
Sure.
But I had a catastrophe a few years ago. It involved a farm, commercial farm that was open to the public. And it's one of those, every community has one of these farms where kids do hay rides. They get pumpkins. They eat caramel apples. and everybody goes there. And so every child through schools, classes go there, families go there, and every community has one. And I had one of those where a large number of very young children were came down with salmonella poisoning that was likely related to the feces of geese that had flown through the community and stopped and had eaten corn on the ground in an area, a petting zoo area. And there were several children in the community who got very sick, but they all survived. But we used a PR consultant and a jury consultant in that to help us shape our message to the public about it and to keep the public advised on what the health authorities were saying about what had happened and to help us understand just how beloved our client was. Mm-hmm. When everything was said and done, no lawsuits were ever filed and no claims were ever submitted.
Wow.
And I'm convinced to this day that our PR consultant and jury consultant helped us shape a message in the community and to push news out about what was going on, such that everybody realized this was a pure accident and not anyone's fault.
Right. Well, I won't ask any more questions about it because I know, obviously, like you said, the statute of limitations hasn't run, but I'm fascinated by how they determined even the potential cause of the salmonella.
Yeah.
Are there any other tools in your litigation toolbox that you use for these cases?
Yeah. I'll add a couple other things because, and I mentioned it earlier, your jury consultant and your PR consultant can help you with this tool, and that tool is Wagner. That's the jury selection process, and a good jury consultant and a good PR consultant can help you create special juror questionnaires. If the court is willing to allow special questionnaires, they can assist you to do social media research on the jurors. If the jurors can be identified, in some communities, you know the names of your jurors, and others you don't. But it's not at all unusual in some communities where you do know the juror names, and somebody can do a quick background search just to see what they're putting up on Facebook or other places, give you some idea of how they view things. And then they can help you with the theme of jury selection, so that as you are asking questions of jurors in the jury selection process, you're staying to a consistent theme that's going to carry you through the rest of the trial. Sometimes we lawyers think that we're amateur psychologists and we know exactly what questions to ask and what themes to pursue. But good consultants can help you really shape it and make a difference, because the voir dire is an important time. It's the first time the jurors hear about the case. It's the first time they meet the lawyers, and you want to get off on exactly the right foot to go through the trial. The last tool that I would have in my tool, well, actually, I've got two more things quickly. One is
Sure.
is how the lawyer drafts jury instructions and the extent to which the lawyer asks the trial judge to admonish the jury not to engage in their own investigations, their own social media research during the trial about the case. I mean, one of the biggest dangers we have these days is that jurors will go home at night, Google the case, and read what's been written in the news about the case. And so, I'm very particular to ask the judge to admonish the jury every chance the judge gets not to be doing social media research. And that's another place where I ask my jury consultants to see what's being said in social media during the trial, so that we know if there's a problem.
That can't be easy. I can't even get my 11-year-old to not look at social media. So
no, exactly. No, I mean,
jury.
It's huge, Dan. It's just huge. I mean, a case can be lost, or won, because of jurors doing their own Google search. Mm-hmm. And what happens, of course, if they Google your client may have had no fault whatsoever for what happened. But if the client had a prior accident some other place where they were at fault, then the juror's perception of the client can be influenced by what they find in Google, that has nothing to do with the trial that's before them. So it's extra important. The last thing is I use PR consultants and jury consultants to prep witnesses. Again, it's part of the thematic, preparation of the case. And so, I like to have a PR consultant and a jury consultant, particularly a jury consultant, looking over my shoulder, probably remotely, because I don't want attorney-client privilege as an issue. But I often like to videotape my witnesses as I prep them to give depositions or as I prep them to testify in trial. And I may want the jury consultant to watch the video to give me input as to how I ask my questions, the words I use, and the order in which I ask my questions, so that I can best prep my witness to give a truthful and credible testimony that fits the theme that we have. So I use them, at many phases. Obviously, there's an expense involved in hiring consultants, and so part of the lawyer's role is to make sure that the client understands from the very beginning how you're going to use the consultants, not only at the beginning, but throughout the case, and how important it is. Because, we're living in an age right now of budgets and tight legal budgets. And so, it's not an easy sell, always, because of the expense, but the benefits are so critical that the lawyer has to really make the case to the client. Hey, I need these people, and here's why I need these people. You just can't assume that the client's going to go along with it. They will push back unless you convince them, hey, this is critical.
Right. You need to really sell them on what the tools that you need to ensure that you win the case. Absolutely. Yep. We see that obviously in our requests for experts on a daily basis.
Yep.
Switching gears, John, to a more personal topic. Outside of your practice of law and your career in the law, what would you say you're most proud of?
Probably, Dan, two things. My family, I managed to put in the years I put in, but yet be involved with my wife and my daughters. They're now married and with children and living in California. And one of my daughters is a lawyer who does a lot of what I do, and I see her at professional meetings. The other is I just love professional involvement, and I'm a bar association junkie. Belong to a lot of bar associations, and I've really enjoyed being a strategic planner for bar associations, as well as doing strategic planning for law firms through the years. And so that's kind of my hobby, is strategic planning for bar associations and law firms. I get paid to do some of that, but it's a labor of love most of the time, because I make a lot of friends that way and really enjoy it.
That's great. It's just so nice to hear that you know how much you really obviously enjoy what you do, both in the courtroom, outside the courtroom. John, thank you so much. This has been so informative. I've learned a lot. I hope our listeners found it to be informative and enjoyable too.
Dan, thanks for having me. And certainly any of your listeners are welcome to call me with questions anytime about any of these subjects.
Great. And they can find you on Lewis Wagner's website, lewiswagner.com. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Engaging Experts. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes.